Today I want to talk about shooting video footage in slow motion of wildlife. I've mentioned before that I've been a stills photographer for 50 years, but it's only since I swapped to Olympus Micro Four Third cameras that I've really started taking video more seriously. And slowly it's evolved so that I'm shooting video far more than I take stills pictures. But it's been a very steep learning curve and there's still a lot I don't know about it. Somewhere along the line I started to shoot in slow motion. And that has now become the dominant thing that I do. I shoot slow motion of wildlife more than I take ordinary footage. In fact, the only time I'm really taking video at normal speed is when I'm doing a singing bird, because the sound would be awful if you did that in slow motion. But the bulk of the time I'm shooting at 120 frames per second on the Olympus, giving me roughly 5 times slow. And I'll just show you a couple of clips as to why I enjoy doing it. First of all, there's this young rabbit grooming itself, and in slow motion I just think it looks so nice. And then there's some wood pigeons, well, an adult wood pigeon feeding some young wood pigeons on a gravestone, and it just looks fabulous when it's really slowed down. I've never been a great one for watching wildlife films on the television. I think this is because I'm doing it all day long. When I get home, if I do settle in front of the television, I don't want to watch more wildlife. I've been doing that all day long. I'd rather watch a film or the football. But since I've been shooting video, I now do watch the wildlife footage. And one thing I've noticed is there is very little straightforward footage with a camera on a tripod. Everything is either slow motion, time-lapse, which is fast motion, or drone work, an awful lot of drone photography, or somehow the camera is moving on some sort of gyro system, but extremely smoothly. But straightforward, normal speed footage is very rare in modern wildlife filming. So let's take a look at the settings for slow motion. This camera is the Olympus M1X. I would expect the settings to be absolutely identical on an EM1 Mark III. The EM1 Mark II doesn't have 120 frames per second, so it's either got to be the EM1 Mark III or the M1X. We'll start off by just looking at the mode settings. I've always kept that set to shutter speed priority, because the shutter speed is so important for video. It should be twice that as your frame rate. So if we're shooting at 120 frames per second slow motion, we should have 2/50 of a second shutter speed. So keeping it on shutter speed priority seems the logical thing to do. Come down to specification settings, and I only use 2 options. We've got the bottom one, high speed 120 frames per second, which is high definition, or I use the top one, which is 4K at 24 frames per second. I haven't used any of the ones in between, but if we look at the slow motion, 120 frames per second, you scroll to the right, you can also set the playback speed. Well, I keep that on 24 frames per second because all the videos I'm creating are created at 24 frames per second. That's the timeline. And as you can see there, it says that we're on 0.2 slow motion, which is roughly 5 times slow. So now I just want to show you some slow motion footage I did in Spain earlier this year, the birds and the bees. I went for a week with Cheerio hides, and the one day there was hardly any birds coming into this drinking pool hide because of the numbers of honeybees swarming around the edge. It was a very impressive sight, but I just wasn't getting pictures, and I decided at the start of the week I was only going to take stills pictures. This song thrush was one of the braver birds. He wasn't so bothered by the bees, but most species weren't coming anywhere near. So I started to run some slow motion video through, and I really wish I'd have taken a lot more. When I looked at the video footage on the evening, I thought, I wish I'd have shot video the whole time now. This looks lovely. This is all 120 frames per second. And you're trying to make your mind up. Is it the bees that's really putting the birds off? At first, you're not certain. This is a black red start, a male. You're trying to watch the way the bird is interacting with the bees, and certainly you have the impression that he's really uncomfortable with the swarms of bees and the noise that they're making as well. The rest of the week was very successful. They've got a lot of wonderful hides set up for all sorts of species. And this is the female. And when I watched the female interacting with the bees, this is when I was absolutely convinced this is what she was uncomfortable with, and kept edging forwards to sip a little bit of water and then backing off again. When you're shooting at 120 frames per second, autofocus doesn't work. You have to manually focus all the time. So you tend to have a peaking set, so the area that's in focus turns red. That really helps to see which part is sharp. And you see here the female very much reacting to this bee coming in from the right hand side. Clearly that is what's unnerving her. But I really do wish I'd have shot a lot more video. This was a fantastic sequence, and I'm shooting more and more video these days. It just looks so beautiful.